Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's complimentary educational webinar, The Difference Between Marketing and Branding, which will be presented by James Heaton and Vincent Fatato. My name is John Polis, and I will be your webinar host today. I am the Chief Operating Officer for your webinar sponsor, Star Mountain Capital, a specialized investment firm focused on the lower middle market. Before I hand the reins over to James and Vincent, I did want to let you know that your audio is muted and will be for the entirety of the presentation. Also, we have allocated time at the end of the presentation for Q&A. If you have a question, you can type it into the Q&A chat box of your WebEx client. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible before the hour is up. Now, briefly about our presenters. James Heaton is the President and Creative Director of the Tronvig Group, a leading marketing strategy, brand strategy, agency, and consulting firm. Vincent Fatato is the founder and president of GreyBox Creative, which has been named a top 2017 top branding agency by a leading independent research firm. James and Vincent, we are excited to have you with us today.
Thank you, John. Thank you. This is James, so I will be walking through the presentation, and we will start with a brand example. Since we're on the topic of the difference between branding and marketing, I'm going to work through our understanding of these terms in a way that hopefully will be interesting because of the examples we use. So some of you may know of this company. They are a reinsurance firm with $65 billion in global reinsurance operations on 5 continents, and they came to us in the beginning of 2014 because they were trying to mount a global advertising campaign, and management couldn't agree on the agency creative concepts that they were being given. So nothing was approved for a year. And the conversations they had with us sort of unearthed that there was a lack of agreement on some basic principles through which the campaign could be evaluated. So we ran a sort of a diagnostic workshop with the leadership at the company. These, by the way, are some of the ads that did not get approved or were never approved. They were ideas submitted by the agency. So when we ran this workshop, and we'll kind of go through the actual questions that we asked them, we were able to resolve a sort of a core principle for the brand so that they could do a brand campaign globally. And it may come as a shock that the principle or the idea was partnership, which is part of their name, but that they had lost sight of. So it speaks to the fact that in the business of doing whatever it is that you do, getting into the nitty-gritty, doing the day-to-day work, you can lose sight of some very fundamental things. And brands require that you pay attention to these things. So here's kind of blurred out all of the stuff leading up to this idea of partnership as the brand idea for this organization that could be the foundation of that campaign. And that was then run. These are the actual this is the redo of the website that featured that and the actual ad campaign. Interestingly, this was all sorted out with them in a very short period of time, but because they're a large multinational organization, they kind of didn't, well, there was 2 things. First, they didn't know that they could actually deliver on the promise, and they wanted to make sure if they were going to make a promise like this, that they had the operational capability to deliver on it. And that's a strong acknowledgement of what is necessary for a brand. Not only do you make the promise, but you have to be able to keep it. So they had to make sure that they could, and they also had to make sure that it actually worked with all of the different audiences. So we did confirmation sort of market testing to make sure that it would be salient across 5 continents, and it was. So even though the finding took only a few weeks, the proof that the finding was good took 5 months, and their testimonial says, you know, it's been great, but they're talking about a 5-month process. it didn't take 5 months for us to realize that the brand idea needed to be about partnership, but it took them 5 months to get everything in line with that after the fact. And that's an essential aspect of branding, that it's not just about what you say, but also how you're able to make that promise true. And this is often neglected in brand work. So I have this statement here: most marketing money and effort are wasted due to inadequate strategy. This is the natural tendency of organizations to just get stuff going. Let's just do stuff. Why aren't we marketing more? Let's do some more marketing. Let's do something because we need more customers. And so activity sometimes precedes thought. And thought, the kind of thinking that is necessary for brand strategy, takes time, and that takes time out of day-to-day activities which seem urgent and important at the time that you're doing them. So to set aside the time to actually think about these things, and particularly to ask fundamental questions, is at the heart of successful brand work. I just alluded to the answer to this question, but I would like to pose it for everyone. What is strategy? And there are a lot of viable definitions, but I'm just going to let you think about that for a moment. What is strategy, after all? At the most basic business level, I like Willie Peterson's definition. I'll read it twice. What we will do differently or better than our competitors to provide greater value for our chosen customers and superior profits for our organization. There's a lot in that sentence. It's one sentence, however. So what will our business do differently or better than our competitors to provide greater value for our chosen customers and superior profits for our organization? That's the essential definition for me of business strategy. In a marketing context, I like a slightly different definition, and this is from Michael Porter. His definition is a differentiated market position backed up by operational practice. So what does that mean? Not only are you saying or positioning yourself in a way that's differentiated from your competitors, but you have the organizational, operational, and procedural capabilities to support that position in ways that are very difficult for your competitors to replicate, copy, or even understand. A great example of this is Southwest Airlines. When they were having such success as a discount carrier, other major airlines like Continental tried to copy their position, the position of a low-cost carrier between sort of secondary cities. And they failed. They failed spectacularly because what they copied was the position. They copied the rates. They copied the surface of the differentiated brand position, but they didn't actually have the organizational or operational capacity to fulfill that promise. So they didn't have any way of not transferring people's luggage. There was all of the systems in place at these major airlines were designed for another purpose, and they couldn't re-engineer them to meet the promise that Southwest Airlines was making. And also from a brand satisfaction standpoint, the fact that Southwest Airlines was able to make a promise and keep it means that in the Net Promoter surveys of all airlines, Southwest Airlines typically is far ahead of all the others in terms of deep customer satisfaction. So again, Michael Porter, a differentiated market position supported by operational practice, and Willie Peterson, what will we do differently or better than our competitors to provide greater value for our chosen customers and superior profits for our organization? This is serious work. This is, and in order to get the answers to these kinds of fundamental questions, you've got to spend the time and the effort. So then let's go to the next part of this, which is branding. So what is a brand? What is a brand, after all? I've asked this question in group settings hundreds of times, and I get a lot of different answers, most of which are true. So most of the answers that I get are correct and good answers. I'll throw up some examples right here of things I've been given. So people think about brands as visual identities, as logos, as a promise, as what you stand for, a feeling, organizational behavior, what your people say and do, your reputation, and absolutely everything that you do. And I think all of these are, in their own way, very good definitions of a brand. And some of them, you will notice, are things like your visual identity, over which you as an organization have control, probably not total control, but a good deal of control. You also can have control over your organizational behavior, and you can have control over what your people say and do. So there's all these aspects of the brand definition here that are under your jurisdiction. But what about a feeling or your reputation? That's getting into very interesting territory, because those are things that are held partially inside but also significantly outside the organization itself. It's how your brand exists out in the world, and not just how you're able to control the things that you're doing within your organization. And I think that these definitions that bring the meaning of a brand out into the world are actually the most useful, because they require the greatest effort on the part of making sure that you can keep the promises you make, making sure that your visual identity actually connects to the principle that you want to espouse in the world as an organization, and to make sure that it is really important what your people say and do and how they answer the phone. And all of that is a contributing factor to your reputation out in the world. So I think, for me, the best definition of a brand is that provided by Jeff Bezos, which is your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And what he's talking about here are the stories people tell voluntarily about you. So this is how your brand lives out in the world, out in people's minds, and what they're able to say about it. We had a client recently that sort of brought this point home to me, because their brand was rather complicated. It had like 3 elements in it, and they wanted to make sure that everyone outside the organization understood all 3 elements. But then when we talked to people closest to the brand, people that knew the most about the brand, they themselves, if they were not actually inside the organization but were big customers, when they talked about the brand, they reduced it down to only one of those 3 things. So their story was not the complicated story that existed inside the organization, but a very simplified version of that story that could exist outside the organization. So if you're not going to do that work of simplifying the story, your customers or your not customers will do it for you. The people out in the world will answer the question that you haven't answered, do the work that you haven't done, and that may not be to your liking. They may not choose the right thing. So you have a responsibility to be clear for yourself so that that can actually live outside of your organization. So branding is a lot of work. We have this tool we call a brand pyramid to help you get clarity within your organization about these brand questions. And here are the questions. These questions may seem almost stupid, but this first question, your company is Acme Manufacturing, or Acme Services. So I will walk into the workshop, and one of the first questions I ask of everybody in the room, I've got all the senior leadership, I've got the frontline people, the sales people, I have 35 people in the room, and I ask them the question, what is Acme Services? 9 times out of 10, they can't answer. Or they give me 5 different answers. And this is a kind of come to Jesus moment in the workshop, because at that moment, everyone in that room realizes that they haven't done this work. And it's like, oh my God, if we can't even answer this question, how do we expect people outside to know the answer to this question? And of course, they don't. And the confusion inside is multiplied exponentially on the outside. And so from that point on, for the rest of the workshop, everybody is there and they're serious. And on average, it takes us 2 to 2.5 hours to get a good answer to this question. And I insist on an answer that is simple enough for someone outside of the organization to understand. My rubric here is, if you said this, whatever it is you're going to say and answer this question, and you said it in a bar, would they listen and maybe ask you a question or turn around and walk away? It has to be not jargony. It has to be clear and simple and use language that means something outside of your organization. You get a little bit of leeway if you're B2B and your customers are also as technical as you are. But in general, simplicity wins, and we're talking about the simplicity that exists on the far side of complexity. It is not easy to get to. You can't start with a simple answer. You have to find your way to it. So that's the first question. The second question is echoed in Willie Peterson's definition of strategy. So how do you, as an organization or as a product or as a service, deliver value differently from or better than your competition? So there's two different things here. So how do you do it differently? I would like the answer to this question to be categorical. So how do we do this in a way that no one else does? Not we give better service, but what do we do that no one else does or that is entirely different in its process or procedure from how our competitors do it? The other aspect or the other variation on this is, well, what do we do better? So that is better X. It's not better service. The differentiated value cannot be matters of necessity. They can't be things that are needed in order to qualify to even be in that industry. Good customer service is probably is table stakes for being in business at all. So that cannot be one of your differentiating factors. It cannot be an answer to this question. So working through what these are gets us to what we call a brand value map, which is this assertion of the ways in which we deliver differentiated value from our competitors. And in working with people inside an organization, this is a strategic hypothesis. This isn't the answer, but it is a hypothesis as to what the answer is. So this has to be tested from the customer's perspective, and we'll get to that in a moment, because that, my friends, is the realm of marketing. So for now, we're in branding, which is really about making sure that we, for ourselves, understand who we are, why we exist, and why we matter. And by the way, why we matter is not to make money. It's to have some impact out in the world, whatever that is. All businesses should think of the money that they make as a byproduct of the service they provide. So you are delivering services out into the world that have value. And the means of exchange, the interpretation of that value turns into money, and hopefully, if you've done this right, profits. But the objective is not profits. The objective, as Peter Drucker likes to point out, is to be useful, to be of service, to be of value. And if you focus your attention there, you're going to have a much more powerful product and brand, because you're going to be able to talk about it in ways that actually mean something outside of your inner circle. That gets us to the next question, which is, why does your customer care? What are the emotional drivers of engagement with your brand, with whatever it is that you're putting out into the world. Underneath this question, there's a presupposition that you know who your customer is. And often organizations do not, or they do not have a clear idea. They think their customer is women. There's no such customer as women. Customers have to be very specific, and the more specific you can be, the more effective your answers to these questions can be, because you really need to deal with sort of the deep emotional drivers, which you need to understand. Again, we're touching on the realm of marketing here. But in the brand context, we want to at least postulate our strategic hypothesis as to why our customer cares, and then we need to test that through marketing research as a follow-up. If anyone's seen the Simon Sinek thing about the rings of what, how, and why why is so important, I think he makes a very good case that it's not what you do or how you do it, but why you do it that people truly connect with. I think that's fundamental to the power of any brand. And then here's this thing which some people like to minimize by calling brand personality, but I think it is essential that you know who you are. And by that, I mean, what are your core values? What are the principles that help you make decisions, large and small, every day, at every level of the organization about everything that you do? What are they? Let's work those out. And let's not have this list of 12 values that are posted on the wall somewhere in some room, or worse, in some document or strategic plan somewhere that nobody looks at, because that's utterly and absolutely useless. What you need to have are values that are in operation every day at all times, and that supersede positional authority within an organization. In other words, it doesn't matter who you are. If you're outside of the operative principles that the values dictate, you're wrong. And that argument should be able to be had no matter whether it's coming from the mailroom or the executive suite. If you can do this, if you can really work this out, then you can have alignment. You can actually make the organization able to deliver on the promises it makes. That's what's underneath the Southwest Airlines example that I gave briefly a minute ago. They worked out the operational implications of a set of principles that were held at every level of the organization, and that's why customer satisfaction was and is as deep as it is. So this is a very important level, and we actually will return to it in a later topic. And at the top of the brand pyramid is what we call a brand idea. It's your brand expressed in the absolute simplest and most easily graspable terms. So a story that can actually be told outside of your organization. I like to give a sort of, a sort of mental test of this. I'll walk in the room, I'll ask, well, when I say the company name Volvo, what comes into your mind? Someone, or two people, or three people will inevitably blurt out safety. And that's interesting, and that's almost the purest form of a brand idea. It's expressed in one word, but it's not just one word. It's one word that has emotional impact for the audience for whom it is intended. So if you think of Volvos as being targeted in America as cars for mothers who are well off enough to spend $10,000 extra to ensure that the children in the back seat are safe, to pay for that brand promise with their hard-earned dollars, that is because there's an emotional undergirding to that brand idea. It's not just, oh, we should be about safety because safety is cool. It's because safety really matters. Safety can be a determining, decision-making, emotional driver for the audience that we are most interested in attracting. And I go on from that to ask, well, okay, so then what's the brand idea of BMW? And then they say, right, driving, or ultimate driving experience. So yes, driving. So in 2016, if you take the line of BMW cars and the line of Volvo cars, which is the safer line according to sort of third-party testing? And everybody says Volvo, and it's like, well, maybe not. Not really. So what's going on there? If BMWs are so safe, if they're as safe as a Volvo, why is for BMW safety a footnote as opposed to the headline? Because BMW's brand idea is driving, not safety. So while they are safe cars, they are the fact that they are safe is not the emotional driver of behavior for the BMW driver. So what each of these car manufacturers, and I've got a list of different sort of examples here, what each of them is doing is they're dividing up the marketplace based on a very simple emotional cue. This is what you want in your marketplace. I mean, they're doing this because there are billions of dollars at stake. There may not be billions at stake in your marketplace, but this is a responsibility. This is a brand responsibility that everyone has. So this Volvo safety, BMW driving, Mercedes prestige, Toyota reliability is interesting because some of these are conscious, like BMW in the American market has focused on the driving experience for 30 years. Volvo did so with safety. Safety, interestingly, has lost power because now every luxury car is almost equally as safe. Safety is kind of a given. It's now table stakes, to use the example that I started talking about before, whereas the driving experience is not. So relatively speaking, BMW as a brand is doing better than Volvo as a brand because now the marketplace, the situation in the marketplace has eclipsed the powerful emotional driver that Volvo once owned. Toyota, interestingly, never talks about reliability. It's just a fact. They are the most reliable car manufacturer. So a few years ago when they were having trouble with the brakes on the cars, this was extremely damaging to them because it went right to the heart of their brand promise. The overwhelming reality of Toyota's reliability, I think, wins the day. But Toyota doesn't have to, like, their marketing is very tactical. They haven't really put all of this energy behind building the reliability brand because it just is. But then you compare these, like walk down, Volvo safety, BMW driving, Mercedes prestige, Toyota reliability, and then General Motors, I don't know. That I don't know is the result of complexity, right? All the different brands with different messages turns into absolutely nothing in your head. So this is a metaphor for that any complexity that exists in your brand expression will result in silence out in the world, in people's minds, where brands need to live. So, to quote Peter Drucker, if you satisfy your customers, you fail. Let that sink in a minute. If you satisfy your customers, you fail, because you must deeply satisfy the customer for whom you are most naturally suited. Again, whatever promise you make sure that you have the operational capability to keep it. Because once upon a time, now, and forever into the future, word of mouth is going to be the most powerful mechanism of marketing. The stories people tell about you are based on their experience. You must have deeply satisfied customers, or they will not tell your story, or they will actually tell the story you do not want told. Negative stories are 3 times more powerful than positive ones. The likelihood that you are generating negative stories has a great deal to do with your capacity to fulfill whatever brand promise you make. If any of you are familiar with Net Promoter Scores, they score the answer to how likely are you to refer us or this service to your family and colleagues. And on a scale of 0 to 10, you have to sort of answer that question, like, how likely are you to refer us? If you answer a 6, I usually ask the group when I'm talking about this, well, what if it's a 6? What is that? And they think, well, that's good. 6 is good. 6 is satisfied customer. The data shows that a 6 is a detractor. A 6 is someone who's going to say negative things about you in the marketplace. They are going to hurt you. So if you have a marginally satisfied customer, you fail. You must have a deeply satisfied customer. So what's a 7 or an 8? So if I say, how likely are you to refer me? Oh, an 8. What's that? That is absolutely nothing. That will do you no good. So that's what they call a neutral. They don't even factor them into the Net Promoter Score because they're useless. It's only the 9s and the 10s. Only those who are so deeply satisfied that they are going to stake their reputation in the context of a referral on your behalf, only they will help you in the marketplace. So if you are attracting or attempting to attract customers who you are unable to satisfy, you are damaging yourself. You are hurting your business. Don't do it. Okay, we've just talked about branding. What is marketing? Marketing is, in my view, looking from the outside, answering Peter Drucker's, well, first this axiom that no one buys what you sell, they buy what is of value to them. Read that again. No one buys what you sell. Whatever it is you're selling, no one's buying that. What they're buying is what they value in whatever it is that you do. So you must understand your customer. We actually have a tool for this. I don't have time to go into detail on it, but it essentially makes a constellation of I'll use my mouse here. It's all these things that you see in this, or all the things that customer needs, and then some of those things are in their mind's eye offered by us, and then there are some of those things offered by our competitors. So our competitive advantage is the stuff in that top triangle, those things that our customers believe that we offer of value to them that no one else offers. So we need to understand what that is. We need to understand what the customer's needs are and what the emotional drivers underneath that are in order for us to be able to communicate with them. So here's an example of sort of this. I'll go through this quickly, but here's an example of this in action. So we have the Bronx Museum of the Arts. They wanted us to increase attendance among local residents in the South Bronx. So you have here the local residents of the South Bronx and then the inside of the museum. They wanted to fix this problem. And we looked at the tactical user-level interface. There was problems with signage on the front door and the signage above the front door. People weren't actually able to see it because they were walking by and looking down. The sort of bus shelter wasn't theirs. And there was the way they were communicating about themselves. So the needs of the audience they intended to attract were things like day-to-day survival, free food, advantages for my kids, inexpensive entertainment. And what they were offering was, from their perspective, contemporary art in a prestigious white wall setting and access to the arts where there is none. What's the intersection between that set of needs and their offer? Nothing. So what we had to do was to look at what they were actually doing. And programmatically, they were actually doing these things, but they weren't willing to talk about them. So they were doing things that had free food, that were giving advantages to the kids, and were inexpensive entertainment, all of those things, but they wanted to just talk about the art. So what we did was created a campaign that the headline is not free art, but free music and all these other things. And it showed people of the South Bronx having fun with inside the museum. And then we looked at the behavior of that population and the fact that thousands of people were walking by, but they were looking down. So we put these lines on the sidewalk. We fixed the signage. And we changed the website from something that you can't see what's inside to something that you can. So again, going from this fortress with no door into a sort of transparent exposure of what's really going on inside that museum, and lo and behold, attendance, sustained increase in attendance over the sort of the run and subsequent to the campaign. So who is the customer, and what does the customer value? Marketing must answer these questions, and this is how it is different from branding. Branding is mostly in thinking about how you deliver value, what you are capable of doing, who you are, why you are of potential value to the world, whereas marketing is about what the customer values, what they need, how they see the world. And what we're trying to find in the intersection between these two things is an overlap between an existing recognized need on the customer's part and an offered value on your part. So these you may notice are Drucker's second and third questions. Who is the customer? Seems like a simple question. Most people haven't got a good answer to it. And what does your customer value? This is where you spend the most time. Marketing in its purest form, in my view, is customer understanding applied. So how do you work with that? We have this thing called a marketing targets diagram. So what it says is, who are we going to market to? We have limited marketing resources. How are we going to spend them? We're going to spend them on very few core targets, who we understand deeply and who we know we are going to be able to deeply satisfy, for whom we're going to be able to build word-of-mouth reputation. And then who will we service if they come along even though we haven't marketed to them, or who might be reached by a marketing message that's intended for someone else? Well, these are those groups. And then who are we going to abandon? Who are we not going to attract? Because if we attract them, they will give us a 6 on the Net Promoter Score. They will be marginally satisfied and turn into detractors out in the marketplace and ultimately hurt our business. We want there to be an exclusion. Every strategic decision that you make is also an elimination. So it is important to be conscious about those eliminations and to do so with knowledge. Knowledge is the marketing insight. Who is it that we're going to be able to attract and whose needs we can deeply satisfy? Let's focus on them. For these others who we would be able to satisfy deeply, but we don't have the money to attract, let's let them in through the door, and let's keep the others out. Now, it looks like there's not a lot of stuff in the abandon ring in this particular case, but for this client, that J is the general civilian population, 99-point-some% of the U.S. population that they were choosing to exclude from their target. This was very hard for them to do, but tremendously beneficial once done, because they were spending all of this sales energy, all of this marketing energy on audiences who ultimately they were not organizationally capable of deeply satisfying. I don't know if I have time for any. Oh, yeah. Okay, I'll give you a couple minutes. I won't do this in detail. I'll just show you an example of this is a real marketing targets diagram. So this is taking 46 possible audiences for, in this case, a particular exhibition, and examining each one on the basis of how capable this would be to deeply satisfy them. And you can see all of the numbers out there in the elimination ring, in the abandon ring, and then very few in the place where we were going to spend the money. The results of doing this work, forcing the organization to focus on so few core targets for whom they knew they were going to be able to deliver a deeply satisfying experience, was, I'll give you the final results here, 142% above institutional average attendance, the largest attendance recorded in the history of the institution. So do the work, get it right, and you can see the results. And the other sort of subsequent data here is that based on surveys, on-site surveys, 66% attributed the visit to advertising or word of mouth, both of which we were focused on activating. And of those, word of mouth, 67% were specifically citing the advertising. So we had landed the message for the target that we were intending to hit. And interestingly, people who never saw the advertising thought they saw the advertising because the word of mouth effect was so powerful, because we had activated a core audience for this particular product. So that's very quick and a lot kind of packed into a 40-minute cycle there. So I will then sort of let this go and open it up to questions. I don't know where I should pause when I'm doing questions because I haven't talked about organizational alignment. Maybe give me one more minute on organizational alignment. So if you go back to this point at the beginning about values, about core values, about the principles that your company operates by, so how do you make sure you can keep the brand promise you make? Organizational alignment is the tool to do that, and it is taking these core values and turning them into operational behavior, policy, and practice across the organization. So instead of a brand experience being dependent on which particular person or what particular part of the organization you happen to interact with, or whether you saw a TV spot or talk to somebody on the phone, regardless of that, if you have an aligned organization, then the brand experience can be a singular brand experience. And if you will recall, singularity, simplicity is the most powerful thing a brand can have. So there's a great positive impact from doing this kind of work. And I will end it there on that nice little picture.
Thanks very much, James. Very, very much appreciated. Here at Star Mountain, we're very focused on culture and really believe that our culture and our brand go hand in hand. Are we right about that? What's the role of culture in branding?
Right. Culture is the part of this that makes the external espousal true. Because you can say, we're this, we are whatever. You can say whatever you want, and you can have a great advertising campaign that puts that out there. If you can't deliver on that, if you haven't worked through how that's actually going to work inside the organization, so this is like the internal aspect of branding. When I think of organizational culture, what I'm thinking in my mind is that's internal branding. If you can't brand internally as effectively as you're branding externally, you are going to intentionally or unintentionally make promises you can't keep, create detractors in the marketplace, and hurt your business. By the way, this alignment work is very hard. It is painful. So a lot of companies don't spend the time to actually work it all out. Our incentives, our sales incentives, align with what we want to be offering in the marketplace. Changing the sales incentive system makes a lot of people really unhappy, but you could have perverse incentives that are actually undermining your brand because of the behavior that it's encouraging among people in your sales force. That's just an example of unalignment. And exposing those problems and then fixing them is work. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it's very helpful. Thanks. So if you're, what is the difference? You were talking about it a little bit, the difference between small and large companies when it comes to marketing and branding.
Right. Very large companies know how important this is because they didn't get that way without a brand. They spend lots of money on this, and they are also more cautious. Like the project I started out with, Partner Re, they're a pretty large company. It took them 6 months to kind of come to terms with the implications of the findings that we came to right at the very beginning. So getting a large company to make changes is a huge project, so it requires a much more intensive and robust process. But Generally speaking, large companies recognize the value of marketing. I've encountered a lot of smaller companies that don't really get it. It's like, why would I spend all that money on that? So there's much more education that we have to do with a smaller company. But the nice thing about a smaller company is once decisions are made, they can be very nimble about application. The thing that is not different between large and small companies is the need to answer these same fundamental questions. Who is our customer? What does our customer value? How are we going to deliver differentiated value from our competitors? Large and small, micro business, monster business, they all have to do this.
Yeah, sometimes with small companies, right? You have to evaluate. I would think, do they have a business or do they have a product, right? And yep. those smaller business owners say, I have this great product and everybody loves it. Why can't we just market it?
Exactly. And I'm gonna, let me just go to a diagram here on my graph here. Sorry for jumping all the way back here, but so sometimes when we're doing this, right? Why can't I just market my product? One of the things we're doing in the analysis and this diagnostic is we're trying to figure out where the problem actually is. Sometimes it is a marketing problem. Like they come to us thinking, well, we have a marketing problem. We're not doing as well as we need to in marketing, so we're not growing as fast as we need to, so let's solve the marketing problem. When we go in and ask these questions, how are you delivering, particularly this one, how do you deliver value differently or better than your competition? Sometimes we're exposing a product problem. So if I can't fill this out, if I can't come up with 3 ways in which I meaningfully deliver value differently or better than my competition, I've got a product problem. And I'm really, no matter how much money I pump into marketing, the long-term impact of that is not going to be what I want it to be until I solve the product issue. So sometimes product problems are exposed. The telltale sign of a product problem is once I've understood what the needs are, I'm unable to plot those needs on top of the brand value map. They like miss the brand value map. They're not there. Like the offer that I think I'm making doesn't match the needs that are recognized in the marketplace. So it's, if you're just out there marketing, you're doing so on the assumption that you understand the customer and that you know how to communicate in terms that the customer will understand. And 80% of marketing dollars, therefore, are wasted because you're either talking to a customer segment that's too broad or you're delivering a message that has no salience or meaning in the customer's own understanding of their world. And we're exposed as Americans to, I think the count is somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 marketing messages a day. With that kind of exposure, if we paid attention to every one of those, we would literally go insane. Our minds are designed to protect us from excessive input. If you think about when you were a kid, or even maybe last year, and you learned a new word, a word you never knew the definition of before, all of a sudden you understand this word, what happens? You hear the word all the time. The word is like, wow, he just used that word. I know what that word means. Before you knew the definition of that word, it meant nothing to you. It had no relevance, and you didn't hear it. That word was there all the time. It was in all these conversations, and you simply blipped it out. That's what a marketing message that isn't targeted does in the marketplace. It is silent. It is skipped over. It is not in existence as far as anyone but the marketer who thinks it's in existence is concerned. So you must sort of spend the time to get the message right and to get the target right. So you can't just, you can stumble into it, and sometimes, trial trial and error gets you there, but that can be tremendously costly. That's I guess, the main point.
Mm-hmm. So James, most of our, at Star Mountain, our portfolio companies and our market are established small and medium-sized businesses. So when they hear you and other marketing and branding consulting firms talking about market research, they think, oh, I have to spend more money. It's going to cost me money to do market research. Can I just focus on improving my product based on what I know? Can you tell us a little bit about, the value of that market research, and give us some hints on some, cost-effective ways to perform market research?
Sure. Right, so market research can cost money. I would certainly argue that marketing costs money, and Peter Drucker's, one of his famous quotes is, there's two things in business that make money: innovation, right, product, and marketing. Everything else is cost. That's the quote. So two things in business make money: innovation and marketing. When he's talking about marketing, he is talking about understanding your customer. So yes, you may have frontline salespeople that have really good insights into customer need, and you can rely on that to get you many steps down the road. But at the end of the day, there's nothing like really getting into the head of your customer to understand how well or badly you are able to deeply satisfy them. So looking from the outside in as opposed to the inside out is one of the most common failings of businesses of all sizes. And what we're really talking about there is market research. How are our products understood and valued in the marketplace? And that seems like you could figure that out, but it's remarkable how tainted your view is, because you are so familiar with your product. You are so inside the organization and what's great about it that it's really very, very difficult for you to see it from the outside in. Never have we done a market research project in which one of the responses was, oh shit. It was never have we done one where that was not at least one of the responses, was, oh my gosh, we didn't, like, nah, we missed that. We've been spending all this money talking about this when really what we should have been talking about is this. Like that, the realization that they have just been wasting like so much money is almost inevitably part of the conversation. So smart companies realize that marketing is essential, and then they realize that at the heart of marketing is customer understanding. And so the second part of your question was, well, what's the most cost-effective way to get that insight?
Well, what are some cost-effective ways? Yeah.
So one is to do sort of deep interviews of your frontline. And I'll start with the least expensive, and I'll go up to the most expensive. So I would say the least expensive and somewhat can be effective is to really go deep into the experiences of your frontline employees, the people who are actually at the interface with your customer, to get into what they know about the customers and really draw that out from them. So to spend the time, sort of drawing out from your internal staff people who have frontline exposure what they know about their customers. That's the least expensive. And you think that's obvious. You think that everybody would do that. It's surprising how little that's actually done. So, and there are particular techniques like projective interview techniques that are effective at really getting those frontline people into the head of their customers more than they might, kind of in a superficial interview. So that would be the least expensive way. The next is to go out and actually interview your customers. And there are various qualitative research techniques that help you get that in, to draw out that insight. But that, you could select 5 representative customers from each category of customer you have and do in-depth interviews to understand what it is that they see in you, in your product, in how it helps them in their lives. So that's more expensive than talking to your internal people. They have to be recruited, and those kinds of interviews are often better professionally done. The next level up is quantitative research, so developing a statistically viable quantitative instrument to measure customer sentiment around various issues. Often that's done well in combination with the qualitative that I just described, so deep interviews along with quantitative to verify the veracity of the findings. So combining those two, but quantitative research in order to get statistical viability can be costly.
Is that in the form of surveys? That's what I was going to ask.
It's yes, and again, you can do really bad surveys. You can do utterly useless surveys. So you can spend money on just garbage. But so that's why I say it's costly. Like you'd think, oh, I can do a survey. That's not going to cost me anything. Well, no, you need to do a survey that's really going to get you the answers to the right questions. So you need to know what the questions are, and then you need to know that the way you're asking those questions and the way you get to statistical viability is actually valid. So you're not given a false answer. So that's why to do it right costs money, and it's good. That's actually good in combination with qualitative, quantitative. They're a nice alternate. But on the simple side, you could do the Net Promoter Survey. How likely are you to refer us to your friends and family, like after every engagement? You could do something as simple as that, and that's better than nothing. It's actually a lot better than nothing. Then you can actually use that to test the effectiveness of different components of your business in terms of how deeply satisfied it is making your customers. Going up from there, there's anthropological and observational research, where you actually go out into the world and observe your customers in their daily behaviors, like you essentially shadow them and see how they're interacting with your brand and other brands and how you're competing with them. This is really useful for like consumer products and things. It's not as useful for like B2B. Again, that's sort of very labor intensive, but can get you insights. Go and see, go spend time on the customer floor. Try and see the world from your customer's perspective as much as you can. I mean, there are things like that marketing people or salespeople can do without costing the company any sort of out-of-pocket. Just starting with the recognition that if you don't understand your customer deeply and meaningfully, you are losing potential profits hand and fist. So that would be, is that an answer?
Yeah, no, thanks very much, appreciate it. And it looks like we're coming up on 3 o'clock, so our hours come to an end. I want to thank everybody who signed on, and it looks like mostly everybody stayed the full hour. We're thankful of that, and I want to thank James and Vincent as well for that very informative presentation, very much appreciated. And should anybody have any further questions or feedback, as always, please feel free to email them to us at webinars@starmountaincapital.com. Finally, we do look forward to hopefully seeing everybody for our next webinar in 2 weeks on October 18th. It will be our quarterly webinar on global macro trends, presented by Dr. Lev Bordovsky. I always have a problem with Lev's name. He's our Chief Risk Officer, and he's also the editor of the Wall Street Journal's Daily Shot. Until then, James, Vincent, thank you. Thanks very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much.